There are moments in life when you pray, and it seems like heaven remains silent. You kneel down, shed tears, wake up at dawn to cry out, but nothing seems to change. The atmosphere in your home remains heavy, the problems keep repeating, and it feels as though your words are not being heard. Many Christians have gone through this. Maybe you are living it right now. Now, go back in time with me. Imagine a desperate father running to Jesus with his son in his arms, a boy tormented by an unclean spirit that threw him into fire, into water, and made him convulse violently. That father had already tried everything, sought help everywhere, but nothing worked. The disciples of Jesus, experienced, confident, had already cast out demons before, but this time they couldn't even stir a speck of dust in the spiritual realm. And when Jesus arrives, a single command is enough for everything to change. As soon as they were alone with the Master, the disciples asked, "Lord, why couldn't we do it?" And here comes one of the most neglected teachings of the gospel. Jesus looks at them and answers firmly, "This kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting." C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Prayer doesn't change God. Prayer changes the one who prays." And here is the secret many don't understand. There are battles in your life that do not respond to words, but to consecration. There are struggles that won't yield to shouting, campaigns, or repetition. There are spiritual forces that only bow before a Christian who lives what they proclaim. Because, as Lewis also said, we are creatures living between two worlds, and at every moment we are tipping the scale toward one side or the other. What Jesus taught the disciples is that spiritual authority is not automatic, not even for those who have witnessed miracles before. There are levels of resistance in the invisible world that only break when the Christian's heart is aligned with the will of God, through true prayer and authentic fasting, not ritualistic practices. And maybe, just maybe, that's what is happening to you. Maybe your prayers aren't passing the ceiling because something inside you has not been aligned, adjusted, or consecrated. I'm not talking about perfection, but about surrender. Not just speaking to God, but allowing God to speak to you, mold you, correct you, and purify you. And before we continue, allow me to ask something simple but deeply important, so this message reaches other hearts that also need this kind of spiritual direction. Leave your like right now and subscribe to the channel. You have no idea how many lives are reached just because someone like you takes that step. Thank you for being part of this mission. In today's video, you will understand a profound revelation about a type of fasting that makes hell tremble, that opens doors that have been locked for years, and that completely transforms the spiritual atmosphere around you. This fasting is mentioned in the Bible, but very few practice it the way they should. And that's exactly what we will explore in the next segments. Prepare your heart. And before we continue, type in the comments, as an act of faith, courage, and spiritual alignment, "Lord, speak to me today." You have no idea how this simple sentence can be the beginning of something great. But before we dive deeper into this powerful revelation, keep your heart open, because now we're going to step into a spiritual dimension that many Christians spend their entire lives without fully understanding. You know that painful feeling of praying and praying and praying, and nothing changes. That moment when you silently wonder, is God hearing me? Are my words just being spoken into the wind? Well, often God's silence is not absence, it's backstage work. Imagine a theater room before the curtain rises. For those sitting in the audience, nothing seems to be happening. But behind the curtain, sets are being built, lights adjusted, actors positioned, only none of that can be seen until the right time. It's the same with your life. The fact that you don't see movement doesn't mean God is still. On the contrary, sometimes the deepest move of God happens exactly when you perceive nothing. And this is where fasting and prayer come in as indispensable spiritual tools, not to change God, but to enable us to perceive what He is already doing. Many times, what prevents the answer is not God's will, it's our internal condition. And that is why you must pay very close attention to what comes next. The biblical passage we're about to unpack reveals something that thousands of Christians ignore. And because of that, they spend decades praying without any real spiritual results. Now let me ask you something. Have you noticed that some battles repeat year after year in your life? Situations that seem to recycle themselves. Emotional cycles you thought you had overcome, but that return with a new disguise. C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, reveals the subtle strategy of the enemy. The devil doesn't need to destroy someone at once. It's enough to slowly turn them aside, little by little, until they don't even realize how far they've wandered. And here is the point. There are spiritual forces that are only broken with prayer and fasting. Forces that do not move with simple faith words but with deep consecration. Situations that do not obey common authority but require a total outpouring of the soul before God. That is why the disciples failed before that possessed boy. They had experience, they had history, they had a past with God, but in that specific battle, none of that was enough. Because some battles can only be won when the heart is aligned with the Father's will, and not just when the mouth speaks words of faith. And perhaps this is exactly where you are now. The door hasn't opened yet, the healing hasn't come, the deliverance hasn't happened, the change hasn't manifested, and you are trying to measure God's power by the immediate result. But Scripture shows that there are distinct spiritual levels, and you may be facing one of them. Now I need to ask you something deep. Be sincere. Are you just praying, or are you truly surrendering? Because there is an immense difference between fasting and merely being hungry, between praying and surrendering, between asking and aligning. And this is where Isaiah 58 begins to shed light on an uncomfortable truth. There are fasts God does not hear and fasts that move nothing in heaven. It's written. I'm not the one saying it. The word is. Why? Because a fast that does not transform the heart cannot transform reality. Because a fast that doesn't change attitudes won't change destiny. Because a fast that doesn't break chains won't break spiritual bondage. That is why Jesus told the disciples, this kind does not come out except by prayer and fasting. He was speaking of spiritual intensity, meaning there are battles that require much more than decorated words or superficial rituals. And it is exactly this positioning that I will reveal to you in the next few minutes. But before we continue, I lovingly ask you once more, because this truly helps this content reach who needs it. If this message is speaking to your heart, hit the like button now and subscribe. This is not just engagement, it is evangelism. It is helping this word reach lives that desperately need it today. Get ready. What comes now may completely change your prayer life. Now that you already understand that there are spiritual battles that can only be won through a deeper level of consecration, it is time to reveal something that many Christians have never learned. And this explains why so many people fast, pray, cry out, and participate in campaigns, yet continue living imprisoned in the same cycles as always. Before we continue, I need to ask you something with complete sincerity. Are you truly prepared to hear the truth that can set your life free? C.S. Lewis said, truth may be inconvenient, but it is always liberating. And here is the truth. Many fasts have no power at all. Many prayers never go beyond the ceiling. Many spiritual campaigns produce no real transformation. Not because God does not want to answer, He always wants to, but because the heart is not in the right place. Isaiah 58, the deepest chapter in the Bible about fasting, reveals an uncomfortable reality. On the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit all your workers. You fast for strife and debate, and to strike with a wicked fist. You cannot fast as you do today and expect your voice to be heard on high. This passage is shocking, because it shows that there are fasts God ignores, fasts that are mere empty rituals, fasts done with the wrong motivation, fasts that appear spiritual on the outside, but are completely disconnected from God's will on the inside. And this explains something many have wondered for years. Why did I fast and nothing happened? Why didn't my prayer bring change? Why does my spiritual life feel stuck? Here is a revelation that C.S. Lewis would express with philosophical precision. God looks at the heart, the enemy looks at the intention, and man looks at appearances. When the heart is misaligned, everything else is too. Now stop for a moment and reflect. How many times have you fasted while holding on to resentment? How many times did you try to move heaven while keeping people imprisoned inside you? And here we arrive at a truth many don't want to hear, but that C.S. Lewis would not hesitate to say. To keep someone locked inside your heart is to chain yourself to them. The fast that has power is the one that releases emotional debts, releases charges, releases old wounds, releases the past, and releases people. It is no coincidence that the biblical text in Isaiah 58:6, right after condemning empty fasts, presents the true fast. Is this not the fast I've chosen, to loose the chains of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? God does not begin by talking about food. He begins by talking about liberation. In other words, the fast God respects is not the one that empties the stomach, it is the one that empties the heart of what imprisons it. The fast God honors is not the one that puts ashes on the head, it is the one that removes the stone of bitterness that became an altar inside the soul. The fast that moves heaven is the one in which you release what you were holding, and what was holding you without your noticing. C.S. Lewis said something that fits perfectly here. All the power we have over others must begin with power over ourselves. That is exactly it. You cannot cast out an external yoke while maintaining an internal one. You cannot ask for deliverance while imprisoning someone in the secret courtroom of your heart. You cannot ask God to open doors while you close doors to people He called you to forgive. And this is where the adversary trembles. Not when you go hungry, but when you decide to break what was binding you inside. Observe the spiritual logic of Isaiah 58. First, God asks you to free others, and only then He promises to free you. C.S. Lewis said, "To forgive is to love someone despite everything, and that is the kind of love that most resembles God." And it is exactly this forgiveness, painful, sacrificial, courageous, that places you in a spiritual territory where darkness cannot follow you. And here we reach a point few preachers dare to address. You may be preventing your own victory by keeping someone imprisoned in your heart. Think about it. Who have you still not forgiven? Who are you still waiting to see pay for what they did? What situation do you continue to replay silently? What weight are you carrying that shouldn't be in your hands anymore? You may be fasting, but if your heart is still hardened, your fast becomes nothing more than a diet. C.S. Lewis wrote something that brilliantly illuminates this spiritual problem. To forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover the prisoner was you. When you fast with resentment, your prayer echoes inside a closed heart. When you fast tied to the past, your voice does not rise to the heights. When you fast asking for answers while keeping people under a yoke, battles do not move. Now imagine this with me, a warrior entering a spiritual battle carrying chains in his hands. How can he fight? How can he lift his sword? How can he face the enemy if he is bound by emotional chains? That is the Christian who fasts without forgiving. It's like trying to run with your feet tied. It's like trying to fly with stones in your backpack. It's like trying to cry out to God while trying to control the destiny of people around you. And in the spiritual realm, this is deadly. Do you know why? He fears someone who releases. He fears someone who lets go. He fears someone who forgives. He fears someone who surrenders. He fears someone whose soul is light enough to move with the Spirit. C.S. Lewis describes this magnificently when he says that the true enemy of darkness is the Christian who not only talks to God, but allows God to transform what is inside him. And that is exactly the type of Christian true fasting forms. Now I ask you, are you willing to let go? Are you willing to release? Are you willing to give to the Lord what you have been trying to control with your own hands? Because we are about to enter the most powerful revelation of this teaching, how prophetic fasting works, the fasting that breaks spiritual chains, changes atmospheres, and makes hell tremble. But before that, if this message is touching your soul, don't forget, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. This is not just engagement, it helps this word reach lives desperately needing it today. Now, understand this deeply. The fast that defeats the enemy is the one that breaks pride, destroys bitterness, crushes resentment, surrenders the ego, frees others, and frees you. This is the fast that moves heaven. This is the fast that makes demons retreat. This is the fast in which God says, "Now I hear you." Isaiah continues saying, "Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will quickly appear." Notice the sequence. You release, then God heals. You forgive, then God frees. You surrender, then God opens heaven. This is the fast that transforms the home, the marriage, the mind, the soul, the heart, and the entire life. And I must ask you, with love and sincerity, during this fast, is there anyone you still keep imprisoned inside you? Is there any emotional, verbal, or spiritual debt you have never released? Is there any yoke you have imposed, or still carry? Remember what Lewis said, forgiveness is not an emotion. It is an act of the will, and the will can be trained. If you want a fast that heaven recognizes, do not start with the plate, start with the heart. And if this word is speaking to you, write in the comments, "Lord, I surrender." This declaration may be the beginning of a liberation you have waited for years. But stay calm. The deeper revelation, the one that will completely change your understanding of fasting, is still coming. you will discover how the right fast opens doors that no force of darkness can close, and how Isaiah 58 contains a promise most Christians have never noticed. Now that you have already understood the spiritual root that makes a fast truly powerful, it is time for us to enter one of the deepest revelations God has given to His people, and that few truly practice. Because there is something that happens when a Christian fasts with understanding, something that cannot be faked, cannot be imitated, cannot be masked. It is as if the entire heaven leans down to listen, and the entire hell becomes silent, because it knows it no longer has authority there. C.S. Lewis wrote something brilliant. We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And that is exactly what fasting reveals. It reminds you of who you truly are. It pulls you out of noise, frenzy, carnality, and anxiety, and returns you to your original state, beloved child, heir, priest, spiritual ruler. But now I want you to listen to this with absolute attention. The fast that moves heaven is not the fast of hunger. It is the fast of a transformed heart. Spiritual authority is not found in effort. It is found in integrity. And this is so profound that Isaiah 58 leaves no room for doubt. In other words, before God hears your voice, He observes your heart. Before God receives your prayer, He looks at how you treat people. Before God opens heaven, He checks whether you have opened the prison where you keep someone captive. Because there is an unchanging spiritual principle. God will not break the yoke over you while you keep another yoke over someone else. And that hurts. It confronts. It humbles. But it sets free. C.S. Lewis said, "To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you." And here is the secret. When you forgive, when you release, when you surrender emotional debt, the spiritual world recognizes you. It's as if your voice gains weight, as if your prayer gains echo, as if you finally speak the language heaven understands. And I know that often this seems impossible. Forgiving betrayal, forgiving humiliation, forgiving abandonment, forgiving someone who should have loved you, but became the cause of your deepest wounds. But that is exactly what makes true fasting so powerful. It is not natural, it is supernatural. And that is why the enemy trembles. Because he does not know how to deal with someone who chooses love when everything suggests hatred. He cannot resist someone who frees others when they had every reason to imprison them. He cannot fight someone who chooses to be like Christ, even when it hurts. And do you know why? Because when you fast with a free heart, you become untouchable. My dear brother, my dear sister, we have arrived at the most important point of this spiritual journey, because now you understand something many Christians never discover. It is not the hunger of the body that moves the spiritual world, it is the hunger of the soul. True fasting, the one Isaiah 58 reveals with such clarity, is a fast that does not stop at the stomach. It is a fast that touches the conscience, transforms relationships, purifies intentions, frees the oppressed, and restores dignity to the wounded. This is the fast God hears. This is the fast that transforms environments. This is the fast hell fears. And perhaps, precisely through the pain you have been experiencing, God is shouting for you to return to the center, to the essential, to what truly matters. A clean heart, an upright life, a faith without masks. Because the true enemy does not fear a Christian who stops eating. He fears a Christian who stops controlling, who stops manipulating, who stops holding grudges, who stops collecting emotional debts, who stops keeping others under heavy yokes. Because a free Christian, forgiven and forgiving, does not carry chains in their hands, and whoever does not carry chains cannot be chained. The fast heaven responds to is the one in which you say, "Lord, I let go, I release, I forgive, I trust." And at that moment, the entire spiritual atmosphere changes. The forgiveness you give to others becomes the very heaven that opens over you. Lewis said something too deep to ignore. Every act of love toward another is an act of obedience toward God. When you fast and release people, heaven releases what was holding you. When you fast and abandon resentment, God abandons the silence. When you fast and give freedom, God gives victory. This is the fast that moves the supernatural, and you will notice that suddenly, what once seemed impossible begins to move. Doors that stayed shut for years begin to unlock. Relationships that were once destroyed begin to heal. The heart that was hardened begins to soften. The body that suffered begins to strengthen. The spirit that was oppressed begins to rise. Because when you practice the fast God asked for, God does for you what you could never do on your own. He acts, because He always acts when His child stops living by appearance and starts living by surrender. If this message spoke to you, declare in the comments, as a prophetic testimony, "Lord, I release so I may be released." If this word impacted you, please leave your like, share this with someone who needs it. Subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications. Every gesture from you reaches a soul that may be on the verge of giving up. May the Lord guard you, strengthen you, and cover you with His grace. See you in the next video.